Hi. We are on part two, Roots of Black Radicalism, chapter 5, Atlantic Slave Trade and African Labor. Let's see if we can get through this whole thing in one video because it's only a couple pages and then we're on chapter 6, but chapter 6 is a doozy. I'm not gonna lie. But yeah, okay. The Ledgers of a World System. The historiography of the Atlantic slave trade is, you know what? No, never mind. I'm just gonna keep that fact to myself. The historiography of the Atlantic slave trade. Look at that. We're on actually African labor as capital. The use of African labor in the still roots of Black radicalism, Atlantic slave trade, and African labor. The use of slave labor in the New World of the 16th century by the Spanish crown and soon after the Portuguese and its merchant concessionaries was consequently a most natural step. Slave labor had been a basis for colonial trade in the Mediterranean, Africa, and the Indies, and it was already the foundation of colonization in the Canaries, the Azores, and the Madeiran Islands. Madeiran. 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 Madeiran Islands. At first, the relationship between capitalism, colonization, and slave labor had appeared almost coincidental. To some, it still does. Philip Curtin, for example, has written, "The choice between freedom and slavery depended on European institutions and habits of mind. One was the... Oh, but it's not coincidental. Like capital... We know this. Okay. I just wanted to say that. I've said that in my brain, but I didn't say it out loud. The choice between freedom and slavery depended on European institutions and habits of mind. One was the Mediterranean tradition of filling the gaps between the demand and supply of people by importing alien slaves. The Venetians used that device in their East Mediterranean colonies, where imported slave labor played an important role in agricultural development in Crete, Cyprus, and Chios. I think I said that correctly. I'm not entirely sure. Chios. The institutional habit was no doubt reinforced by the fact that Venice was a city-state, not a large territorial unit with abundant population resources to be mobilized and sent overseas as colonists. Notwithstanding Philip Curtin's rather casual language in describing the process, we should remember that it was in Venice's affair of trade that Oliver Cox situated. He said, hold up. The first capitalistic organized commerce in human beings. Damn. So Venice... Wait, let me look up habits of mind real quick. Girl. Okay. On Google, it says habits of mind provide the framework for developing positions for leaders to use when confronted with problems and situations. Necessary life skills. The choice between freedom and slavery depended on European institutions and habits of mind. Habits of mind are life skills necessary relative to operating society. And he said, oh, okay. He said, it depends on you to become free, bitch. Oop. Never mind. Not bitch. Sorry. Are a set of thinking dispositions at the core of social, emotional, and cognitive behaviors. Okay. Interesting. He said it's your fault, not systemic oppression. Okay, anyway, sorry. It was in Venice's affair of trade that Oliver Cox situated the first capitalistically organized commerce in human beings. Still, at first, as we have noted before, the slave trade had been more significant to Venetian commerce than slave labor. So they was profiting off the trade, but someone else was profiting off the labor, the plantations. Oops. As Italian capitalism matured, however, this emphasis on trade was to change for three reasons. Briefly, they were the expansion of the power of the Ottoman Turks in the Eastern Mediterranean. Damn. Excuse me. They were the expansion of the power of the Ottoman Turks in the Eastern Mediterranean in the 15th century, the extension of sugarcane cultivation from Asia Minor to Cyprus, Sicily, and the Atlantic Islands, Madeira, Cape Verde, and the Azores at the end of the century, and the collaboration of Genoese capitalists with the ruling classes of Iberia. These events transformed the incidental relationship between capitalism and slave labor into the very foundation of New World enterprise. Madeira, as it turned out, was the physical and historical juncture where these processes congealed. Sidney Greenfield observes, with the introduction of sugarcane and its commercial success, Canary Islanders and Moors, followed by Africans as slaves, performed the necessary physical labor that enabled the upwardly mobile settlers of Madeira to develop a lifestyle derived from the tradition of the continental nobility, but based upon the physical efforts of slaves producing commercial crops for sale on the markets of the continent that characterized the emerging social institutions of the slave plantation. Importante. That's important. But anyways, you can see that in America too. Dang. Anyways, you can see that in like how with like America, the indigenous population be wiped out, and then blah, 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 they use enslaved people, the whole 9 yards. The admiral of the ocean sea was the embodied connective, Columbus, a son of Genoa, the agent of the Spanish crown, an ambitious merchant who had married into one of the families of the lesser Portuguese nobility, which had acquired its new wealth from the early colonization of Madeira and the cultivation of sugar there, and the founder of Spain's Caribbean colonies, had also brought sugar to the New World. In England, where envy of Spain's monopoly was tempered by the Spanish Empire's sea power for at least the next century and a half, it was all said quite simple. Columbus's West Indies became known by English merchants as the Sugar Islands. However, for the time being, that is the better part of the 16th century, Italo-Portuguese enterprise dominated the European trade with the Atlantic coast of Africa. This meant that see, you have my pronunciation or my articulation of my words, I need to work on that. This meant that African labor for the colonial plantation of Sao Tome, Cape Verde, the Azores, Madeira, and the West Indies, and the mines of New Spain and Peru were supplied by these merchants. Until 1750, Leslie Rout Jr. maintains in an almost absolute consensus with other students of the trade, the Portuguese had the lucrative slave trade entirely to themselves. And as the colonies grew, so did their appetite for piezas de Indias, captives of just war. They would take people. But they was doing that in ancient Rome and ancient Greece too. Anyways, that's not the point. For Angola, as early as 1530, Jan van Sina calculates the annual export figures were from 4,000 to 5,000 slaves a year, and if there were no more, this was due only to the lack of ships to carry them. No wonder Afonso, the Catholic king of the Congo and collaborator in the trade with the Portuguese crown, had been shaken enough to write to his partners in 1526. There are many traders in all corners of the country. Everyday people are enslaved and kidnapped, even nobles, even members of the king's own family. It seems the trade had already exceeded the boundaries of its commercial origins. Even the conquest of Portugal by Spain in 1850 did not retard the acceleration of the trade. Indeed, the Spanish left the trade to their Portuguese underlings to administer. That relationship persisted until the Portuguese regained national independence in 1640. By 1650, it is estimated that 500,000 blacks were living in Spanish America. More than 220,000 Africans had been transported to the ports of Cartagena, 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 and Veracruz by Portuguese merchants during the first 45 years, 1595 to 1640, of their Spanish trade. Enriqueta Villa writes, "It is undoubtedly the Portuguese era that marks the African ethnic influence in the new continent. It was the Portuguese who, by creating a vast network of traders, factors, and middlemen, and by profiting from the drop in the Indian population," they mean like native when they say Indian. I just want to make that clear, because sometimes I'll be like, "What? Why do you keep saying that?" But it's like quotes. Achieved a market capable of absorbing such enormous quantities. I believe that the Portuguese period was a special era for slave trade, which was never repeated. For Brazil, Iniquity writes, "The first reliable census in 1798 showed that there were 1,988,000 Negroes in that country by this time. By the 18th century, of course, Portugal's monopoly on the Atlantic slave trade had been superseded first by the Netherlands, and was now the business of the merchants and ruling classes of England and France. The ledgers of a world system. The historiography of the Atlantic slave trade is immense and still growing. Consequently, at least, the outlines of the trade and the characteristics of those economies and societies that required slave labor are fairly well known. In any case, even the barest review of the literature would entail volumes in its own right, and perhaps deflect us from our primary purpose here, the purpose being to ascertain the material, social, and ideological foundations for the emergence of the Black radical tradition. Our attention, then, will be centered on the work that most directly bears to this problem. The significance of African labor for the development and formation of the commercial and industrial capitalist systems can be only partially measured by numbers. This is the case because, first, the numbers we have are questionable, but more disconcerting, the relationship between the... Sorry. I need some coffee. Delish. Dun, dun, dun. The relationship between the growth of capitalism and slave labor has persistently been in dispute. Meaning that, they've been like, you know how people try to underscore the significance of slavery in America? They're like, oh, it was like 500 years ago, or it wasn't that much. And it's like, it's actually, what? You know what I mean? Like that stuff. At least one influential school of historiography has denied this relationship, challenging the volume of the slave trade, its profitability, and in some instances even arguing for the benevolence of the trade and slavery. What I just say. But I didn't say it, and he articulated it much better than I could have described it. Right. As Roderick MacDonald puts it, the shadows of Adam Smith and Ulrich B. Phillips loom large and dark over the profitability question, and their perspectives continue profoundly to influence the debate. Still, it is not quite the case, as MacDonald terms it, that you pay your money and you takes your pick. With respect to the volume of the piezas de Indias transported to the New World, Philip Curtin's work is at the center of the storm. In 1969, Curtin authoritatively calculated that between 1451 and 1870, 9,566,000 African workers were brought to the Western Hemisphere. He further concluded that it was extremely unlikely that the ultimate total would turn out to be less than 8 million or more than 10,500,000. This significantly lowered the figure most commonly used as 50 million. Yeah. Okay, sometimes, you ever have to, it's 50 million. But damn. I think he's wrong, though. if he was already wrong earlier where he was like, okay, yeah. Anyways, he's like showing his biases. Anyways, um, in in 1976, however, I.E. Ini Corey published a critique of Curtin that took him to task for the casualness of his methodological and statistical computations. His shallow historiosity. Hold up. Historiosity, meaning that he didn't dig deep, you didn't research, you just skimmed it. You really didn't even read it for real, did you? And in the subsequent debate for the particularities of his logic and ideology, Inequality's argument related to the slave population and slave import figures of the Americas, slave smuggling, and the inaccuracy of official slave export data in Portuguese African territories, Angola and Mozambique, understatement by the customs records of the volume and value of commodities employed by English merchants in the purchase of slaves on the African coast, as well as the number or tonnage of shipping employed. Inequality's treatment of custom records, contemporary censuses of slave populations, descriptions of population fluctuations due to the epidemic and varying conditions of work, and the studies of Altus Ainstey, Anstey, Daget, Daget, and Patrod and Davis would appear to support an upward revision of Curtin's figures by at least 1/3, meaning that man is 1/3 off. Like, we gotta go up, actually. It's more than that. Damn. Girl, why can't I read or speak? No. A preliminary summation of Inequality's figures for not only for only the major periods of the slave trade comes to 15,399,572. Still, whatever the actual number was, the volume of the trade was enormous. The work of Inequality, MacDonald, D.R. Murray, and others, however, serves to underscore dramatically Curtin's remark that before the 19th century, the number of Africans crossing the Atlantic each year exceeded that of Europeans. Moreover, as we shall see momentarily, the relative decline of European colonists to African populations from the end of the 17th century, and in some instances the decline of the Europeans was absolute, may have helped to confuse the issue of the profitability of the slave system. With respect to the significance of African labor for the development of European directed economies. Ow! Okay, sorry. Directed economies on both sides of the Atlantic, the literature again is substantial. We have already noted Marx's assessment in his letter to Anakov in 1846 and his later treatment of the same issue in the first volume of Capital. For Marx, slavery had been the chief mementa of primitive accumulation, an economic category of the highest importance. First, African workers had been transmuted by the perverted canons of mercantile capitalism into property. Then, African labor power as slave labor was integrated into the organic composition of 19th century manufacturing and industrial capitalism, thus sustaining the emergence of an extra-European world market within which the accumulation of capital was garnered for the further development of industrial production. You guys know what? Do we have time? We're at 19 minutes. I really want to talk about Ellis Island and like industrialization and stuff, but I won't. You guys, it's so hard not to go off on little tangents of stuff and just like thinking, but this is important. That is really important to me. especially the ways in, okay, anyways, we'll just keep going. But I put a little, it's all colorful. La 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 la. Okay. Marx, however, was not the first to recognize the existence of a relationship between Britain's economic growth and the business of slaves. Williams reminded us that in the 18th century Liverpool, the red brick dust. Okay. Why did I wink like that? Oh, so when I was a kid, this is how I would wink. I would be like, but like make it so obvious. Anyways, the red brick customs house was blazoned with Negro heads. In 1788, to Bristol, which had preceded Liverpool in the slave trade, the West Indian trade was worth twice as much as all her other overseas commerce combined. Even contemporary English writers were prescient enough to match the signs and lexicons of the streets. In 1839, at Oxford, Herman Merivale had anticipated Marx when he lectured. Oh, but this is just showing how like African labor became like the basis of like capitalism, the profitability of like such, whatever, you know. We speak of the this is what Herman Merivale said. We speak of the blood cemented fabric of the prosperity of New Orleans or the Havana. Let us look at home. What raised Liverpool and Manchester from provincial towns to gigantic cities? What maintains now their ever-active industry and their rapid accumulation of wealth? The exchange of their produce with that raised by the American slaves, and their present opulence is as really owing to the toil and suffering of the Negro, as if his hands had excavated their docks and fabricated their steam engines. Every trader, trade, they engage in trading. I say trader and I think like traitor, instead of trader, who carries on commerce with those countries from the great house which lends its name and funds to support the credit of the American bank, down to the Birmingham merchant who makes a shipment of shackles to Cuba or the coast of Africa, is in his own way an upholder of slavery. And I do not see how any consumer who drinks coffee or wears cotton can escape from the same sweeping charge. And think about that now and how that applies to right now. How capitalism is like, there's no ethical consumption under capitalism because of the way that it's structured. We have like enslaved populations, mass incarceration, enslaved populations, slavery right now in terms of like the not cotton, but like the fabric stuff. You know what I mean? Like everything. It doesn't change. The structures just become more. Whoa. Sometimes it's like, you know what I mean? Like how things, like, as much as time has gone on, things still stay the same because of the way that the structures and institutions have been built. But that's important. Anyways, that's crazy. I really want a brownie right now. Don't judge my cups. Okay? Thanks. A century later, Eric Williams, as we have noted, made the point again. But isn't that crazy how we're like literally living in the past in terms of like, we can see the same patterns of capitalism, of colonialism, of this is talking about what, in 1839? And it's 2024. Like, girl, I think we can do better than this. Oh my God, look at my baby. Anyways. A century later, Eric Williams, as we have noted, made the point again. So, too, has MacDonald more recently. Labor was the key to the development of the Americas. Initially, land was plentiful. Capital was available to prime the pump, and labor was provided by African and Afro-American slaves. The source... Damn, I need some chapstick, y'all. Anyways, the source of all value is labor. The value of the New World, the fabulous wealth of Saint Domingue, Brazil, Jamaica, and Cuba, created by slaves, was enjoyed not only by planters and in the colonies, but by the mother country. It was reinvested, it was reinvested, purchased power and position, and stimulated development in commercial and industrial spheres. That's important too. But it's like highlighting the connection and seeing how, you know how it's like nobody's free till we're all free because of the way that like oppression in the systems in place. It's like showing how the systems in place are connected and contribute to the systemic oppression that's going on to this day. But yeah, sometimes it's like it when even for like I just say things out loud because it's like a reminder to myself as well to be like, oh, how does that connect? What does that mean? And seeing how slave labor is like literally required, or capitalism is dependent on slave labor and all that stuff. But anyways, these assertions of Merivale, Marx, and MacDonald and the political economy of Williams' analysis can be buttressed in the myriad of ways. One writer indicates that, okay, I'm going to pause at this part down here, and then we're going to finish the rest because it's like only a couple pages, but it's like 26 minutes. Quite early, English colonies had begun to pay off, and by the middle of the 17th century, of a population about 5.5 million, it is estimated that about 50,000 were at sea. Moreover, the wealth of the plantations drew together the commercial bourgeoisie and the state. Hold up, that's important. We're gonna sit up for this. Ooh, I've been laying down. Whoa. Okay. Hey. Okay. England's colonies had begun to pay off, and by the middle of the 17th century, of a population about 5.5 million, it is estimated that about 50,000 were at sea. Moreover, the wealth of the plantations drew together the commercial bourgeoisie and the state, implicating them in the behavior and institutions entirely dependent on the existence of slavery and long-distance trade. That's important because think about now, like, okay, you know how no, wait, I'm gonna let that sit. Let me finish this. Wait, let's finish this. But that's, you know what I mean, like, okay, like how if I say it right now, I know that I'm not gonna be able to articulate what I'm trying to say as well. I want to write this down, so I'm just going to make a note about that. Oh, and plantations, y'all. Nope, let's just keep going. Sorry. I just made it a little... Okay. In Spain, Portugal, and the Netherlands, and France and England, the immensity of profits to be made spawned themselves corruption as it... oh my God. Sorry. In Spain, Portugal, the Netherlands, France, and England, the immensity of the profits to be made spawned extensive corruption as its telltale mark. The English and French colonists and planters were slower than their Spanish, Portuguese, and Dutch contemporaries to come to sugar, but when they did, that is, when tobacco ended its reign of wealth, they too displayed their venality, whatever that means, venality. For one, the colonists had helped to transform England into a bourgeois democracy from within a capitalist and commercial trading economy. Okay, we're gonna have to put that in notes. At the end of the 17th century, mercantile, capitalist, and commercial trading economy. Okay, what? Oh, sorry. I got confused. At the end of the 17th century, mercantile elements of the Christian nation had circumvented the religious prohibitions against usury, institutionalizing their financial freedom with the official establishment of the Bank of England in 1694. The rise of the English bourgeoisie, of course, occasioned the beginnings of the overturning of English society. The leading members of this mercantile clique had been associated with republicanism, treason, and Dutch connections in the previous decade. This was exactly the background P.M.G. Dickinson suggested the contemporaries expected plans for a national bank to have. In France, the maritime bourgeoisie were forced into a much more dangerous game. The slave trade and slavery were the economic basis of the French Revolution. Sad irony of human history, comments Girardes. The fortunes created at Bordeaux, at Nantes by the slave trade gave the bourgeoisie that pride which needed liberty and contributed to human emancipation. Nantes was at the center of the slave trade. Nearly all the industries which developed in France during the 18th century had their origin in goods or commodities destined either for the coast of Guinea or for America. Upon the success or failure of the traffic, everything else depended. Okay, pause here. And then we're going to get to the next video.